Hey, good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a great Tuesday so far. Today, I wanted to talk about investment projections. And what do I mean when I say that? Have you ever heard anybody say something like, if you invest $1,000 a month, then in 30 years, you'll have $2 million or something like that, right? If you invest this much money every month, then you'll have this much money 30 years from now or 20 years from now or whatever. And I think there's a good place for things like this. It's useful to try and understand the compounding effect of money, the benefit it provides us in the present so we know what we're saving for. But oftentimes, the projections we make, the numbers we assign to them, it just feels disingenuous to me because it's usually not the whole picture. And I know that there are mathematical intricacies around using a set return number, right? You might get these returns in different order. The sequence of returns is a big deal. And I am not talking about that today. That's its own thing. But my issue with statements like these, if you invest, let's say, $1,000 a month today, then 30 years from now, you'll have $2 million. That's technically accurate. Those numbers I just gave you at average S&P returns, which is just under 10%, like 9.8, 9.9%, $1,000 a month would result in about $2 million 30 years from now. That's true. But here's the problem with this. So today, in 2025, things cost twice as much as they did in 1999. On average, products and services cost double what they did in 1999. So let's imagine we say to somebody in the late 90s, hey, if you invest $1,000 a month, then in 30 years, you'll have $2 million. Is that true? Is that the whole truth? Let's say they're walking around with those $2 million just like we said, but it can only buy half of what they thought that it could. Because dollars mean something very different today than they did 30 years ago, right? We all have those products that we like to reminisce over. Those things that used to cost this much back in the day, right? I like to do this with fast food. That's kind of my gauge of inflation. Because it wasn't too long ago that McDonald's had a full dollar menu absolutely filled with variety. And Taco Bell's dollar menu was less than $1. But unfortunately, these days are no more, and they're never coming back. But if I walk into retirement, planning on the prices of today, I'll be very disappointed by my reality. So that's why I have a hard time with these kind of statements. If you save this much a month and this many years, you'll have this much money. But there is a really easy way that we can fix this. Because all we need to do to get a better picture is just factor that inflation in to our projected investment returns. So if the S&P 500 does just under 10% on average, maybe we don't use that 10% figure. Maybe we use an inflation adjusted figure. By the way, if you factor in the average rate of inflation into average market returns, what do you get? I'll let you guess for a little bit because remember, average S&P 500 returns are just sub 10%. So what might an inflation-adjusted return look like on average? I will tell you, it is about 6.8 to 6.9%. And I'm okay rounding this off to 7% for the purposes of these conversations. I think that is okay in this context. But in fact, if you are familiar with Ramit Sethi and all of his financial coaching work, he actually does a really good job on this front. I don't agree with a lot of what Ramit does and says, but if you listen to his stuff, you might notice that when he factors in investment projections, he uses this 7% rate of return, which feels appropriate to me. I like that number, 7%, a lot more than 10% when it comes to understanding what that money will be worth. And I especially like it more than 12% or some of the other numbers that you might see out there. And by the way, those people, they mean really well. I just think they're using the wrong data set. But let's go back real quick. And we tell that couple, hey, if you invest $1,000 a month in the S&P or whatever, then in 30 years, you'll have around, let's say, just over $1 million. Well, in 30 years, they're going to come to you with their $2 million and say, hey, look, you were wrong. We made way more than that. And you'll know, well, no, not really. That $2 million is really worth more like $1 million. Because we don't really care what the dollar amount is. We care what it can buy, what it can do, right? So next time you hear projections around investing and retirement savings, just take a moment to ask, does this factor in inflation? Because dollar amounts that are not inflation adjusted are meaningless. We don't understand them, right? So just make sure that when you're doing these sort of projections, you're factoring in inflation also. And that's all I have for you. So I hope y'all have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you later.